I think we're live. Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to our risky business session on SAP vulnerability management in sort of DevOps and change control with Rev-Trac and Onapsis, how those two solutions can work together. I'm Tom Venables. I'm the Director of Enterprise Solutions for Turnkey, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by Dan and Alec from Rev-Trac and Onapsis, respectively. We're going to talk about a customer-specific example of how they've achieved better automation, better vulnerability management in their estate with your solutions. So welcome to the session. Do you want to briefly introduce yourselves?
Sure. Alec, your pleasure.
Sure. I'll go first. Alec Brailsford. I'm the VP in charge of solution engineering, basically pre-sales over here at Onapsis.
Okay. And I'm Dan McGran with Rev-Trac. Rev-Trac is the product. The company is Revelation Software Concepts. I'm the sales director for Rev-Trac. Great to be here, Tom. Really excellent to be invited to this, and appreciate the risky business sessions that you're putting on for the SAP community. Thanks. It's got a lot of good information in it. Yeah.
Glad you're enjoying it, and I hope everybody else is getting something useful out of it as well. And we'll continue that trend now.
Okay.
So obviously, I've been working with Rev-Trac and Onapsis for quite a number of years now. But for anyone who's maybe not familiar with your solutions, can you talk about what it is that you do for SAP customers, how you secure their estates and help them, secure their environments as they continue to not only go live with these solutions, but run and maintain them in a secure manner?
Sure. Okay. Alec?
Sure, I'll go first. So Onapsis is a full-service cybersecurity suite for SAP. It comprises of 4 components. There is Assess, which is our vulnerability management solution. So it allows customers to, on a recurring basis, scan their environments, look for missing patches, understand if there are misconfiguration issues, if there are other issues around user accounts, etc., and helping to kind of keep them secure over a period of time. There's also Defend, which is our real-time threat detection. So while you're going through your environment, you're looking for vulnerabilities, etc., you may be patching those and doing mitigation. You've got to have something in place where you're actively looking to see are exploits actually occurring, and that's where the threat detection piece comes in and can do that in real time. There's also Control, and Control is really around code compliance. So we're able to do both code transport as well as custom code scanning. This allows for being able to look into the code to see if there are any insecurities in the code, if there are misconfigurations in the code, and it can integrate very easily into the CI/CD process. And the last piece is Comply. And Comply is really around the compliance checks, because at the end of the day, the core of it for security for everyone is really around ensuring that they're able to pass audits and they stay compliant, especially with the lots of regulatory requirements that are out there. And Comply allows them to be able to go in quickly and easily, generate reports, and test the environment to see whether or not they're staying compliant.
And that's based on the compliance framework. So if they're PCI DSS or
that's correct. Yes, SOX. It could be guidance like NIST 800-53, etc. That is correct.
Excellent. Thanks, Alec. And Dan, where do you fit into the puzzle?
Sure. So Rev-Trac is our main solution that's been in the market for about 25 years now. And it's a DevOps orchestration solution. That's a fancy way of saying managing your SAP changes end to end, right? It's built in SAP, in the ABAP language for SAP. And fundamentally, it's got 3 key components. Briefly, it's a workflow solution. So it handles that end-to-end workflow for the different types of changes that you're managing through your SAP environments. It could be just a single S/4HANA environment. It could be some of our larger customers have 20 environments in addition to just the core ERP SAP environment. So it's that workflow solution that's very flexible and customized. It's also an error detection solution. The types of errors that Rev-Trac automatically checks for would be sequencing errors, transport sequencing errors, as well as dependency errors. We also help manage parallel development that's going on in these environments, people working on the same configuration or objects at the same time. So that's really what our error checking does. And then we're also a deployment solution. So we deploy the changes automatically to the target systems once they hit their appropriate approval steps. So that's a quick overview of the Rev-Trac end-to-end solution.
And I like that you use the term DevOps, not DevSecOps, which has become a bit of a buzzword. But I've always thought that security should be built into your DevOps processes. We don't need to call it out specifically as long as good practice is being followed.
Good point.
What's great about that is the good governance processes. So using those workflow automations and approvals, but based on real insights. And I think that's where the integration between Onapsis and Rev-Trac really comes into its own, is those are informed approval decisions. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's great. And for the benefit of everybody listening and watching us, I don't want to talk conceptually about this. I don't want us to go through a load of slides and talk about how this can conceptually work. I want to talk about a real world example of how we've done that. And I think we talked about a major municipal authority that's deployed both solutions and is using that in their estate at the moment. So to start with that, before we come on to that, why is it important that people protect against these vulnerabilities? We talk a lot about internal fraud, SOX controls. There's been a lot of sessions talking about segregation of duties and GRC. But the vulnerability management in the development lifecycle and the configuration and code errors that we're talking about, that's starting to move towards more of an external threat than necessarily an internal fraud threat. Why is it important that we secure against those?
So I'll start off there. So I'll jump in and kind of say the fraud threat can be both, right? So you can have bad actors inside and outside. So let's get that misnomer kind of taken off the table right away. But essentially, when you look at it, SAP, like many other ERP solutions, are a major financial app or a major application within enterprise environments. And in many cases, they're driving operations, they're driving business, they're driving finance, et cetera. And historically, attacks that were perpetrated against environments were more so from a disruption perspective, right? I want to take down the system, I want to block the environment, et cetera. Now attacks are a lot more, I would say, mature in the sense that bad actors are more so looking to get to financial data, personal information, intellectual property, et cetera. They understand that especially these large applications like an SAP have the ability for them to access money, access funds, whether it be to steal those funds or to utilize ransomware and get money through the customer that way. So it's very important that you ensure that these systems are patched and you limit the exploits. One of the things, so there's an arm to Onapsis called Onapsis Research Labs, and we essentially we spend days and nights kind of going out there understanding the attack landscape, right? So what type of exploits are being utilized, et cetera. And one of the things that we recognized is that, and this goes back to the key of your question, right? Why is it important to stay on top of it? A lot of the attacks that are perpetrated on these environments are not using zero-day types of events. They're utilizing vulnerabilities that have been, where the patches have been available for quite a period of time. So they're not necessarily reinventing the wheel or coming up with new stuff. So the fact that environments or enterprises are not able to keep up with the patching, with the configurations, et cetera, and especially because most environments are very application driven. And when you talk about DevOps, it's all about agility. I want to be able to create my application, send updates out, and I'm going to be doing that on a recurring basis, and I want to do that quickly. So it causes this whole dilemma of the balance between security versus agility, and agility usually wins, right? So it's very important to kind of bring that security piece in and bring that aspect into the DevOps environment to ensure that as much as you're pushing the code out quickly, you're ensuring that you're doing it securely, and we're able to do that. And I know we'll discuss further the product they're using and how they're able to leverage that.
Yeah, and Dan, I think Alec highlighted one of the key things there, which is this move towards a more agile development mechanism places even more emphasis on the good governance controls that you're helping support.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that balance between agility and protecting production, right? That customers are faced with, and how do you do that, right? Well, what our customers are doing, particularly the one we're going to talk a little bit about today, is they can enforce that process, right? And enforce can sometimes sound like a negative word, but not if it's an intuitive and very user-friendly enforcement. An example, particularly speaking of the Rev-Trac and Onapsis integration, would be early in the process before a transport gets released. Rev-Trac can automatically, as part of our workflow process, send the contents of those transports, those objects, to Onapsis for automatic analysis, right? Where Onapsis control for code, for example, would do its market leading type of activities to secure your code, make sure it's got the performance standards, make sure it has all those things that they're checking for automatically. And there's no user interaction to do that because the integration takes care of it. It sends it to Onapsis, it brings back the results. Rev-Trac can process a pass-fail. If it passes, it can move to the next step in the workflow and be released. If it fails, it automatically rejects it, sends it back to the developer and says, you aren't able to move forward because you didn't pass the initial code checks that we have set up that are required. And then we would even store those results, a link to those results within the Rev-Trac interface, so the user gets the benefits of the advanced code checking, for example, without having to go navigate necessarily to the other tool, because Rev-Trac is enforcing it for them in an easy way, right?
Yeah.
So that's and then it also makes sure that people don't do workarounds, so they don't forget to do the code enforcement and code checking steps, right? So that's a big part, is enforcing that process to help with those vulnerabilities.
Fantastic. So with that in mind, let's drill into a little bit about the requirements that our municipal authority customer came to you with. Like what were their pain points and what were they trying to solve?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give a little background here. So we did a customer success webinar about 4 or 5 months ago with this account, and the account is City of San Diego. There's a success story on our website if anybody wants to see it. So we can name the account. That's we've been working with them for quite some time. They wanted to join us today, but they have other priorities and projects going on. So unfortunately, they're not here. But we started to work with them, wow, it was almost 8 years ago. They were going through an SAP HANA project, not S4 HANA, as many SAP customers are going through today, but they were converting, I believe it was MS SQL to SAP HANA for their large SAP environments back then. And along with that, they were going into what's called an N+1 environment, where they were setting up additional development systems for each of their landscapes and quality systems so that they could manage this upgrade and other projects that were going on simultaneously, right? They were also engaging with a few partners, some global SIs, to help them. So there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, creating all kinds of change, all kinds of transports, all kinds of risk in their environments. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to move away from their highly manual change management process that was in operation at that point, right? It might be familiar to people on today's call, things like they were using SharePoint as the shared repository and a bit of a workflow engine. They were using Excel sheets to track things and manage things. They were using emails, of course, to communicate, and that was sort of their central source of audit, believe it or not, for the transport movement. And of course, then they were just doing manual activities for the SAP imports by the basis team. So they wanted to move away from that and really move into a much more highly automated process. They are a municipal authority, so they have their processes that they have to go through. They went through a fairly long evaluation process, an RFP procurement process, and at the end of it, they ended up going with a Rev-Trac and then an Onapsis solution as sort of that DevOps toolchain approach to meet those goals of automating many of those manual steps they were doing earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's not unique to any of our customers. Is a lot of them are operating manual processes that can be difficult. Getting greater automation is always a good return for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Alec, what were the pain points that you saw?
Sure, absolutely. So some will be repetitive to what kind of Dan outlined, but for us primarily it was really around the manual processes, in reviewing the code, right? So which could take several days, right? You could still miss errors. And then going back to the agility point that we made, while you're assessing the code and you're looking for potential flaws within it, for want of a better term, you're still developing, right? You may be pushing code, and you may have to push things because it has to go out today, right? So you can miss things. So it was really about helping them around that process. One of the areas was around also correcting the issues in the code as well, which we can do. We have like a quick fix capability where we can find certain flaws, like, for example, if you've got embedded passwords, if people are using personal emails, which we've seen that situation before, where we can quickly fix those. But I think the main point, or the main thing, going back to Dan's point, is the integration into the process to make it seamless, right? Where it's almost invisible, where, as a developer, I continue my day-to-day tasks. I write my code, but in the background, there's an automated sequence that's going to ensure that, all the necessary checks are made. If any discrepancies are found, you're alerted on right away, and it's all along that process. So it's during the development, during the testing, all the way before production. So what that allows for is to, limit situations where for them, they push code to production, and all of a sudden they find issues in it, and that slows the process. They may have to pull that code back, and certain features or capabilities that they'd like to have in front of the public are not available anymore. So those are the main things, really around ensuring that they could cut the time frame that it takes them to be able to do the checks, ensure that when they're pushing out the code to production, they're not going to run into situations where they're going to lose time, lose revenue, because they have to pull back certain code, or they have to take production systems offline.
Excellent. So working together, you've been able to give them confidence that even in parallel development streams and quite aggressive deployment timelines, they have a greater degree of confidence that they're not taking a clean system and introducing new vulnerabilities to it that could be exploited.
Correct.
I think that's I wish this was around back when I was reviewing SE 38 lines of code and having to go through them manually. So I think it would save a lot of pain points. You mentioned, Alec, the modules, assess, defend, control, comply. Which modules are San Diego using? And I think it's control for code that is obviously integrating quite well with Rev-Trac, but did they use any others?
At this time, they're reviewing others. Primarily right now, based on the Rev-Trac process, they were focusing on control for code, which is broken into two pieces. I think Danny alluded to one portion of it, which is a code transport piece, right? And there's also the application code itself, right, where we can look at the application code, simultaneously.
Yeah. And then, Dan, it's one solution from your side, is it?
Yeah, it really is. There's just one Rev-Trac solution on our end, which controls that end-to-end process I was talking about before. We do have REST API integrations, and then even ABAP-based integrations, such as called user exits in the SAP world, right? That we would integrate with some solutions like Onapsis with. So, but it's all included in there, and really our only licensing metric is the number of SAP systems that you have, right? Anywhere from a single to customers with maybe 20 or 30 dev systems and all the associated quality and pre-prod and prod systems. So,
yeah, so it's full stack security for them, really.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I've worked with both solutions, and I've had a much easier time moving my changes through and sequencing with the help of Rev-Trac, and just being able to assess systems in a much speedier manner with Onapsis has saved me days of effort. Reviewing configuration errors, checking all of these code elements that can be introduced in vulnerabilities.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on the feedback we've received from the city of San Diego and in interacting with them for the past 8 years is that they still talk about how surprised they were how quickly both solutions went in and were operational, right? From the configuration to the testing to the rollout and deployment phase, just a matter of a few weeks to get this stuff going. So,
yeah, so low time to value,
exactly.
Which is
quick time to
nice
value, low time.
So.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm assuming that with that greater automation, they were actually getting some return on that investment as well, because they're not spending days manually reviewing code. They're not having to manage their transport processes through a million Excel spreadsheets. but they're gaining efficiencies all the time by automating these processes.
Yeah, absolutely. ROI was certainly something they come back to all the time. A lot of it is of that ROI. You can measure that two ways, right? The reduced manual effort, right, from the highly manual process that they had before, where you could actually put a time to each change that you're managing through there, and it was reduced greatly. So that just means that I guess they're more called soft costs, right? And then with the protecting production, with the combination of the native Rev-Trac security checks for the sequencing, it's specifically called OOPS, Overtake Overwrite Protection System. Won't get too much into it, but it's preventing the nasty overtakes in production, as well as other systems that you want to avoid, as well as our dependency checks that we do, and then combine that with the Onapsis checks, and you're avoiding P1 incidents, which is what everyone wants to do due to the security concerns or to transport sequencing or dependency issues. So that's where a lot of the ROI, comes into play.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
What I'd probably add to that as well is that, again, going back to the whole compliance and audit portion of it as well, is that with the reduction of all the various things such as, less P1 incidents, cleaner code, etc., when it comes audit time and you provide your audit reports, now you're showing that you have a much safer, much more secure environment, right? So,
yeah,
absolutely.
Meaning less time talking to auditors, right? Which is
exactly.
No offense to any auditors.
Exactly, but we it's a great point, Alec, and the audit question we get asked a lot by prospects and even existing customers, and I'm certainly by no means an auditor and haven't not a ton of experience in it, but I try and keep things simple, right? And it's, if you have a process that everyone agrees to and it's documented, and then when the auditors come in and say, show me that these changes followed that process, and if you can do that from a single source of truth, such as Rev-Trac, capturing all this information, the call out to Onapsis, yes, we did the code checks, all that type of stuff, the auditors are scrambling to find other things to look at.
Yeah.
Right.
They're never going to give you a blank piece of paper, right?
Right.
But
it diverts their attention to other things. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think this is a really timely discussion to have as well, because Alec, you brought up compliance there, and we're seeing a whole raft of changes at the moment, legislatively around the world that is pushing greater sort of cybersecurity confidence requirements, the ability to detect intrusions and to prove that you're securing your estates, and reporting that up to board level. So you're probably familiar with the SEC ones in the US and the FTC safeguards rule. These types of solutions really do help people demonstrate that they've got control over their estate and that they can detect intrusions. Certainly Onapsis Defend is a good example of that. But proving that your production estate is as secure as you can make it, that you don't have poor processes that are implementing vulnerabilities, is going to be key for our customers. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say absolutely 100%. And, though our focus on this in this conversation has really been around, what's been used by the municipality, looking at the full suite, when you look at, for example, Assess, which does the vulnerability management, it's not only discovering what those are, but it's providing customers what the mediation steps are. You can see trending over time. So as you fix those things and mitigate those in the environment, you can see that over time. And then going back to the defend conversation, there are many things that may come up from a vulnerability perspective. Maybe you have to do a configuration change, right, to fix something or close a certain port. In certain environments where you're performing certain types of production, you may not be able to do that, right? Because from a business or a product perspective, you have to have that running. So the threat detection piece ensures that in areas where you have to create exceptions to the rule, you still have that level of protection to say, hey, I have to leave this configuration this way, even though SAP says from a security perspective, I need to convert this. How do I ensure that if something actually occurs, or if somebody is attempting to exploit it, I'm aware of it and I can in some way go and mitigate. And that's where the threat detection piece comes in as well. So yes, all the pieces of the suite kind of tie together to give that holistic security protection around SAP.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good success story. Is in the cybersecurity world, the sort of NIST framework of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, those pillars are covered very effectively by those solutions. And, a big part of protect is making sure that we govern the change effectively, which is what Rev-Trac is providing.
Yep.
And that governance is informed by good quality analytics backed up by your research labs. I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Something I did want to touch on as well is you assign sensitivity to different projects as you're migrating these. So you can enforce greater rigor depending on the sensitivity of the project, which is a key part of understanding those. So if you do notice a configuration change that's in there, it gets a higher sensitivity, it gets additional rigor over that. And that's an important part of the process for the client.
That is correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm aware that we're coming up on time, and I want to talk about what the outcome was. We talked about the requirements, what it is that you've done for them. They were happy with the deployment timeline, but ultimately, what did they see as an outcome from their time with you and the benefits delivered?
Sure, I can tackle that first and then pass over to Alec maybe. So definitely the ROI was something we had mentioned a little bit before, right? So they're continuing to see an ROI on those investments, but some of the specific ones that they've shared with us over time were no more missing transports in production, right? So they didn't get there and then say, oh, where's the rest of this? Or it worked in quality, but it's not working in production. What happened there? So there was also no accidental overwrites in production any longer. Right, leading to potentially those P1 or other incidents, right? Their CAB meetings, their change approval board meetings, or change review board meetings, whatever it might be called, were much faster and much shorter and less frequent, right? So people were spending less time meeting because they had all the information at their fingertips and the process steps were already taken care of. So they didn't have to spend as much time in those meetings, but they were still getting the good results. A side effect of the Rev-Trac is that they told us it helps with the the quality refreshes from prod to quality. That's just sort of a side effect, not part of the workflow. They mentioned better testing in their environments, especially between the different quality systems, because remember I said they had the production support, or N quality systems, and the N+1 quality systems, and through Rev-Trac's automated cloning, bringing those prod support changes into the N+1 or project landscape or upgrade landscape, as it may have been, they were in sync. And so the testing that you did in the one mirrored the testing in the other, and you weren't testing on out of sync, and it was pulling those production support changes into those project changes automatically. So that was a big thing. And then just other things, better reporting, better efficiency of the teams, and those types of things.
Excellent. And Alec?
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. I think the first thing that I want to touch on, and when someone's purchasing a product, it's not just a product, it's a company. So one of the first things was the partnership, right? So the partnership between Rev-Trac and Onapsis, where if issues arose, we're able to, through collaboration with the two organizations, fix those quickly, get things moved forward, and they could sense that in how we operated. But another important aspect of it is really around the factor of the in-depth code scanning that we do. So there are many products that will do code scanning, but because we're purpose-built for SAP and we understand it end-to-end, we can go a lot deeper and a lot wider than any other product in the market space. So specifically because this was focused around SAP, we had all that capability. And of course, we've talked about this before, a lot of that intelligence is powered by, our Onapsis research labs and our abilities to be able to do that. But that level of in-depth analysis was really key for them because, again, they've utilized all the products for code scanning, but it didn't get as deep as we were able to go and as specific around SAP.
Excellent. And hopefully you'll be able to help them with Defend and some of the virtual patching capabilities going forward. We're coming up on time. I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat, but I wanted to thank you both for joining me and talking through that success story. I hope it's opened some people's eyes as to the benefits that can be achieved here. It's not just about security.
Sure. I know questions didn't come through, but maybe something that might be interesting if we have one more minute here would be just, Alec, your take, and then I could contribute on S/4HANA projects, right? How and why would Onapsis be a good solution when you're starting an S/4HANA journey, and I can do the same briefly with Rev-Trac.
That's a really good thing.
Absolutely. So I'll go really quickly. So, the misconception historically is that on-prem SAP was secure because it was internal, it was behind, security barriers, and then moving to cloud kind of changes that whole, dynamic, right? But with anything that you're putting in place, we always talk to customers where they're typically, well, once we get to production, we'll look at the security aspects and we'll look at the scanning. But when you're moving, you got to recognize that a lot of times you're moving at times a dirty environment, you're coming into a clean environment. So the best time to look at security and to build in processes is as you're building that environment out, right? So because it's very hard to pull things back once you've actually pushed them forward. And we've seen that historically with security in an environment where a user has access to everything, and when you cut it back, you get all the complaints. But if they start off very limited, they don't know what their boundaries are. So it's very good to kind of set the guardrails, set the boundaries very early as a part of that process where you're doing the migration into the environment and you're building in the security processes. It's going to ensure that the end product that you have has all the capabilities from an agility perspective, but also has the security as a foundation of it. Makes it a whole lot easier.
Absolutely. And same thing on our end, right, is get it in early so that you're, as you're doing that migration, because the code in your ECC, as you're moving it to S4, let's say you're doing a brownfield or a bluefield type, right, you're going to be, you're still going to be making changes in your ECC environment. So you may as well start making that as secure as possible, right, from the beginning. So you're not just doing it big bang at the end, right? Do micro doses of the code remediation and the code security, so that as you are bringing that into your S4 environment, it's already secure and clean. You might have to do some remediation outside of the security scanning. Of course, that's a bigger part of the S/4HANA project, or a different part of it. But it's important to do it early, and so when you finally do transition over, it's as secure as you can get. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big move to shift left with security, and especially as we adopt agile deployment. And I think, build it clean and then make sure it stays clean is definitely the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Highly recommended. Yes.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Risky Business will be continuing throughout the day. We've got Kelly coming up next. Dan, Alec, thanks for joining us. It's been really interesting. I hope everybody's got some good benefit out of that.
Yeah. Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers.
Yep.